All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the workshop for the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. Today's August 4th, 2020, and this is the workshop on the second draft of the continuation budget. I'd like to go ahead and ask our county manager to make his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, this second draft is a reflection of the goals that you've established over the last several years. We talk about a lot of the current work product, so it's the operating budget as well as the CIP. Pete will show you that we now understand the dollars that we think are good, that we're certain will be available next year based on the current millage rate and property values. And we'll also show you an estimate of the loss of revenue that we believe we'll experience by the end of the year for whether it's enterprise funds or some of the other revenues. But so I think we'll just let Pete get started, and if you have questions, we're happy to answer them along the way.
Good deal. Yeah, commissioners, in the workshop format, remember all you have to do is turn your microphone on and just go ahead and jump in if you have a question. All right, Pete, go ahead.
Thank you, Roger, and good afternoon, commissioners. Just to fix where we are in time right now, so today this is the second draft of the fiscal year 2021 operating budget. You saw the first draft June 16th, and a lot we'll talk about today is what's changed since June 16th to August 4th. We're going to show you the first draft, the capital improvement plan, major maintenance plan. A lot of that, we may be reading off the heart. Oh, there we go. A lot of that won't be new. It's been on the plan for a while. We've talked about it in years past. So some of the projects this is the year that we've told you that they were going to hit the CIP, and here we are. So, and then you set the maximum property tax rates, millage rates this morning. We've gotten those to the property appraiser this morning, and they're ready to go on the truth and millage notices that will be mailed in the next couple of weeks. And also on the truth and millage notice, it will show the public hearings for the budget, which is September 3rd for the first budget hearing. We had to have that on a Thursday because of state requirements. And then the second is September 15th, and those will both be, the advertisement for that will actually be the truth and millage notice that folks receive in the next couple weeks. So that was the schedule. As I said, we're going to review, today would be a lot of review, especially on the operating side, of the changes since June 16th, some of the challenges and the things we're doing in order to mitigate some of those challenges, and then look at the capital improvement plan and major maintenance. And then questions at the end. And the questions we'll be asking, are you okay with where we are? Because we'll have the final look at the budget August 25th after your next board meeting. And then is there anything additional you'd like to consider, considered as we continue to develop the fiscal 2021 budget? So this is where we ended up on July 1st, after the June 1st estimate, and then the July 1st was the final tax base numbers from the property appraiser. General fund tax base, the June 1st estimate was 4.96%. The final number was 6.96%. So I'll show you what that resulted in a future slide. And then the other funds, library, the preliminary estimate was 5.46. The final was 7.4. Unincorporated MSTU, the preliminary was 7.02. And the final was 8.95. And for all hazards, the preliminary was 6.61, and the final was 8.54%. So all of them increased by about 2%.
Pete, I was really pleased to see the increase in the unincorporated MSTU of almost 9%. Any idea what you would attribute that to?
Not off the top of my head.
Excellent. Just good government. Thanks, Pete.
Chairman, if I could, would it count because of more properties being paid into the MSTU? That would help contribute to the increases of that? It's not just the values, but there's more properties paying into it as they come online through the years?
Some more properties have been built in the unincorporated MS.
Yeah, I don't have in front of me the breakdown of new construction versus just appreciation and values, but the unincorporated area is a fast-growing portion of the county. It's not built out, of course, so I don't have a really good explanation on that increase.
I'm just thinking if you had more properties paying into it, like areas in unincorporated areas from my district all the way to District 5, and you got the new businesses there on 31 and Northwood Road. I mean, there's more properties paying into it throughout the community. It would help contribute to that increase. And good budget practicing too.
Yeah.
On your
Well,
part too.
I can tell you that the unincorporated MSTU has outpaced the county-wide tax base over the last 3 or 4 years. The increases have.
Thank you.
So this just shows taxable property values, the whole history from right before the recession to today, 6.96% in the general fund, and taxable base of $89.3 billion. And then in green is the projection that the Florida Revenue Estimating Conference does. Now, they did this in January and haven't done a reprojection, but this is the best we have to go on at this point. But that's what they had projected in January. So in the general fund, our total revenues in the general fund were $467 million for fiscal year 1920. The final tax base at 6.96 generates another $21.8 million in revenues. However, and I'll show you fairly significant reductions in other revenues that we already know about for fiscal 2021. And it's primarily state sales tax sharing and revenue sharing. And so that brings down that increase in the property tax base. So state revenue sharing impacts, and we just got these numbers last week, so we incorporated them into all of our models. Other than property tax revenues, in the general fund, the largest other revenue we have is state sales tax sharing. That is the state 6 cent sales tax, has nothing to do with the local option. And the state receives that 6 cents, and then it does, through a formula, shares a portion of those revenues with counties. And our actual for fiscal year 18-19 was $51.6 million. And you can see the state projection for next year is $42.2 million. So that's a more than 18% decrease. But we
Dan, you got fiscal year 18-19 and fiscal year 2021. Where's 19-20?
19-20 I don't have on there because we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. But we had budgeted in that $50 million range.
And so I understand the state sales tax. What is the green one, the county revenue sharing?
So county revenue sharing is a significant revenue in the general fund, comes from the state, and that is an additional portion of that 6 cent state sales tax and cigarette taxes. It's a combination of those two. Received actual of $18.2 million in 18-19, and then for 2021, the estimate's $15.6 million. We'd reduced that to $17 million for our 2021 estimate in June, and then reduced it another $1 million based on this estimate. So what you see here has already been incorporated in the next slides and all the numbers you see.
Are there any restrictions on the use of these dollars, or can they be used for anything?
Yeah,
okay.
They can be used for anything. And I will say that the $42.2 million, typically the number the state gives us, we outperform that. So I think that's a conservative estimate on the state's part, and makes sense that it would be. So since June 1st, the increase in the tax base from what we showed you between June 1st and July 1st was $6.4 million. And these are general fund changes. And you'll see later on, almost all of the $6 million we're recommending to be placed in a revenue stabilization account. The next line is mislabeled. I'm sorry. That what that is that's a repayment of tourist development taxes for the beach park operating costs. So the tourist development taxes pay for a portion of a beach park operating costs, and we just did not have that included in the June 16th numbers. So that's a plus to the general fund. Our juvenile justice mandate, which is an expense, came in lower, so that's a plus, $854,000. And then I'll show you later we've reduced the transit subsidy by quite a bit next year because of the CARES Act money that transit is getting specifically, and I'll describe that in a little more detail in a few slides here, but it's completely different from the direct funding allocation that we got from the Treasury. And then these are increased costs in the general fund since June 16th. One is medical examiners requesting a forensic investigator having to do with just the amount of cases they're experiencing due to both population growth and the COVID situation we're in. The community redevelopment districts, our projection for that was $410,000 lower than what the final tax base came in at. And as I said, state sales tax sharing, we had reduced that for the June 16th workshop, but we put in what that actual $42 million number is that we got from the state last week. So that's a additional. It's a reduction in revenues, and same with county revenue sharing, a reduction in revenues. What this shows is some of the decreases we've experienced so far. We are keeping track of these. You see a number of $23 million at the bottom, but that is spread a bunch among many funds. A couple of them, state sales tax for May and June, and revenue sharing for May and June. Those were down quite a bit because May and June was most likely March and April collections. And then June would have been May collections. So that was down quite a bit. I can tell you that the July collections for state sales tax sharing was only down $404,000. So it looked like June started to come back, and then August will probably be the July numbers. So it looks like that as the economy opened up, that reduction in sales tax wasn't nearly as much. And also for July, for revenue sharing, that was down only $174,000 from the previous year. So you can see after the last part of March, April, and May, that was a real hard hit. But then since then, June and hopefully then July, we'll see in August, the revenues are starting to come back. Same with Ben Avis was telling me. Same with EMS transport revenues. July transports were up, so it looks like those numbers will be coming back. Tolls, a portion of that is just when the economy was basically when the stay-at-home order in May and March and April and portion of May. A lot of that has to do with fewer people going across the bridge, and then a portion of that is, as we're tolling by plate, there's invoices outstanding. So you can see that $3.8 million is invoices that are outstanding.
How does that compare, Pete? I mean, with what we're used to, is this something we can weather? Is that going to affect our ability to make the bond payments on the bridge or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
We have plenty of surplus toll revenues.
Okay. And then the one, I don't know if you were about to hit on it, but the one that I was really concerned about is the Visitor and Convention Bureau. I know we have quite a bit of a surplus in that tourist development tax fund. However, I don't know how long we can sustain an $8 million annual loss. Do we have any thoughts on when we would see that recover? I imagine tourism is actually probably going to take a while to recover. What are your thoughts on that $8 million loss?
So We actually, in mid-year, we revised the projection for the collections for tourist development taxes for this year and then for next year, and they're both around $35 million. And then we've based the budgets for fiscal year 2021 based on that revision. And again, I think we'll do better than that $35 million, but that's a conservative estimate at this point.
I think that's a smart move.
And then parks, libraries, other things we either shut down or we had suspended those payments for a while. So as I talk about Tran and the annual subsidy that the general fund provides to Tran to make it work, there's a local subsidy. It's mostly state and federal grants, but then there's a local subsidy. That money comes through the Federal Transit Administration and is separate and apart from the direct allocation that we've been talking to you in the last few meetings on the CARES Act. So it has separate guidelines, separate restrictions. You can see today there were a couple more programs that were approved, and you can see some of the other entities that are receiving money. But what I wanted to focus on was this $19 million that Tran is receiving from Federal Transit Administration. And that can be used to basically to operate the system. That's what it can be used for. So you can use it for operating costs, lost revenue, marketing, salaries. It's there to help operate the system, and that's what other transit entities are using that money for, because it's very difficult times. Generally, we have a subsidy going from the general fund to the transit fund of about $13 million a year. You can see, because of that $19 million we're going to receive, and this was an anticipated drawdown. We got some guidance just in the last few days that may even that out a little bit into a third year, but we reduced the transfer from the general fund to the transit fund by a significant amount, and that's going to help the general fund in the lost revenues we have in the general fund.
Mr. Chairman, I'm thrilled to see that, because that's a substantial subsidy we do annually, but I'm surprised, pleasantly, I guess, that we are able to use that federal COVID money almost as a direct subsidy, as opposed to everything else has to be, we're using it because it was related to the COVID virus.
It is, in fact, a direct subsidy for transit. It's a separate pot of money, even though the dollars come from the CARES Act. It is specifically earmarked by Congress for transit.
And we don't have to justify it like we do all the other
Well,
we're passing out.
We'll report how we use it. Is that correct, Pete?
Correct. What we do is we send the costs to the Federal Transit Administration that we're covering, and then they send us the check for that.
Okay, I'm sure everybody's thought through this. It's a different way of doing things.
Yes, sir.
But couldn't come to a better need locally.
Right. And I think we have, how long to spend it? 3 years?
3 years.
Yeah.
Well, can we do the $8 million every year, or is that divided over the next 3 years?
Pete?
Commissioners, when I put this together, we just got some new guidance on these FTA funds within the last couple days. When I put this together, we thought that we would have to use it in 2 years. Now we realize we can use it over 3 years. So when I come back on the 25th, I'll probably show you a different drawdown schedule.
So,
Okay, I'll just be interested in seeing that, but there's no risk, obviously, or you wouldn't be recommending this and are utilizing these dollars in this fashion.
and while we're using those dollars over the 3 year period, you know, the economy hopefully comes back to 100%, and we'll get back to sort of business as usual.
Without the subsidy.
Yes, sir.
Have we been beating that down a little bit every year? Or have we had to increase the subsidy? Like the last decade,
Increase.
each year it seems to me we've had to do a little more.
Yes, sir.
So this is a huge momentary catch-up.
It is.
Thank you.
And then you've seen this slide many times, our general fund debt, which is related to the jail expansion and the downtown Justice Center tower and parking garage. We pay that off in 26, 27. However, we're in a low debt environment and those payments increase in 21, 22. We've been accounting for that. We account for it in all the modeling, and we've accounted for it in this reduced revenue environment also. And then this is just, you've seen this, a summarization of all of the things we've paid for out of either growth increment funding, general fund, and excess general fund reserves over the last several years after the board adopted a policy of a minimum reserve level of 20%, and then looking each year what could be paid for with excess reserves, with a couple other things in there. And that's $166 million over the last 7 years. So that's an incredible amount of investment. And on the proposed, I'll go through that in the next slide in more detail. So this is the slide you saw June 16th, only now we have 6.96% increase in the tax base, and there's a couple more adjustments we've made to it. So total revenues of $472 million. You saw that on a previous slide. Expenses of $454 million. That's reduced from June 16th because the transit subsidy has been reduced. So a continuation surplus of $18.7 million. Then we have what we're calling a placeholder now, commissioners, for wage adjustments, wage increases. What we would like to do is we would like to have a final discussion of that August 25th. We are still doing some internal review and analysis of that. As you know, the Sheriff's Office included a 3% increase in his budget submission, but we're still doing some internal review and analysis, and we'd like to come back to you with a final recommendation on that August 25th. So our current reserves are $100.7 million. If you add in $12 million of remaining surplus, you have about $112 million of reserves. You have a minimum 20% reserve level of $92 million. So these are expenses that we would recommend, and you saw some of these June 16th being paid from excess reserves. Sheriff's capital items, which are vehicles, technology items, tasers, $5 million. The sheriff does not have his own CIP, so each year we look to excess reserves to pay for some of his large capital items. As comparison, that was $4.4 million this year. Sheriff's radios for the new analog to digital emergency radio system that is currently being built. And the sheriff's radios, the handheld radios, as well as the car mount radios, was a significant investment for the sheriff, $9 million, which they financed over 7 years, and so this is the annual payment, $1.4 million. Likewise, EMS, which is a general fund department, has to change out all of its analog radios to digital radios for the new system. So we're recommending $1 million be used to pay for those. Other radios that are being switched out from analog to digital are paid for by the fund of where they reside, whether that's utilities or transportation. Transit South Transfer Station. This is the transfer station, and we'll talk about it a little later in the CIP, that we've been looking at least 7 years, if not for a decade, for a site for this transfer station. It's at Bell Tower now. That doesn't work. It's a difficult traffic pattern. It's overly crowded. We've looked for a site by Lakes Park, several sites. At one time we had discussions with Bell Tower about getting another site on the property that would work better. Finally, we've come up with a site which is at the elections center there on 41. The front part of that site, it's got a good circulator, and we can build the transfer station there. And the county has a required match of $430,000 for that project. City of Palms Park demolition, we're just putting this aside for when that happens, $1 million. Debt sinking fund, $2.5 million. Conservation 2020 replenishment, $3 million. You purchased a couple properties today, but what we did is looked at the spend rate and determined that we'd need another $3 million in there to keep it over the $40 million balance, minimum balance.
Okay, let's stick on that. The balance today, cash in the bank and 2020 fund is 40, thereabouts?
43 million.
43?
Yeah. It did.
And we spent, what, 1.6 or 2 to this morning?
Yeah.
Just under 2.
So we're going to add this year 3 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm okay with that. And the reason I stop here is in the middle of my campaign, I get a questionnaire from some environmental group that is still mad about the $500,000 that we stole, 8, 9 years ago. We used to annually would commit 0.5 mils to the 2020 program, and it continued to build, and that's how we had a $100 million balance in that account. But when the recession hit back in 07, 08, we quit using that 0.5 and said, we had $100 million in that account. It didn't make any sense during a horrible recession to continue adding to that. So we took the equivalent of the 0.5, and we put it into our operational budget. And there people saw that as thievery. And it wasn't thievery at all. There was no constitutional mandate. There was not a vote of the citizenry that identified that 0.5. We had done that just as a part of the budget preparation every year. But I'm telling you, there are still people that are angry that we stole 0.5 mil back then, and we continue to steal it. In the meantime, we have rewritten the ordinance totally, and we have created a mechanism, which we're seeing right here, to replenish those dollars to make certain they're adequate to respond to the need as the parcels are approved and brought back to us for final approval. I'm tired of getting letters from good-intentioned people who misunderstood all along what we've done here. The 2020 program is well funded. I'm pleased to see this $3 million beefed up in there, and if we have to do more next year, we'll do it. And if we get an Estero Farms again, and we need $100 million, that is not likely to happen, but we have other means through the use of reserves to take advantage of something like that and then deal with a replenishment on an annual basis in the years ahead. So I'm just telling you, I'm comfortable with the way we are replenishing this, but I don't want it ever to be just an afterthought. I want to make certain we look at it and count the balance and make certain we still got the 30 or 40, 50, hopefully, in the bank, because this is the one project that the citizens have voted for on 90% basis. They want this program continued strongly, and we're doing that. That's the point of my taking this 4 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but thank you.
Chairman, if I could, Commissioner Mann, I get the same questions, and you mentioned about campaign time, but it happens throughout the year. But I'd like to go back a little bit farther before any of us was here, Roger, before you even came back. So back in 2010-11, I got the documentation in my office. Ken Wilkinson's office and Charlie Green, the clerk of court then, was the ones that brought attention to the board back then. to point out the board was not allowed to dedicate $500,000 because it was not a voter-approved referendum. It was a policy decision by the Board of County Commissioners. And that's why Ken Wilkinson, I got the documentation from Ken Wilkinson, and I know Bill's over there. Bill, if you need the documentation, we can provide you because I know you're repeating what people say we stole the money, but I know we didn't, but that's what they're thinking from 10 years ago. But what happened was Charlie Green and Ken Wilkinson determined the county was illegally taking the money off the millage. It wasn't a separate line item. So the county did the right thing back then. I think you were on the board, John and Tammy and Ray and probably Brian, yeah, and then made the decision to follow the law. People didn't understand it, so they thought the county was like, oh, they're still collecting the money and not using it for 2020, but I understand you did the right thing. You had no choice because it was brought down from the state and the property appraiser and the clerk report. So we still, like you said, people are still talking about it 10 years later. They don't understand it's a policy decision. It's actually a better policy now, what we have now, than what we had before, So we actually, you can see what we've done the last 4 years, over 10,000 acres of conservation land. So when they say that to you or me in the future, what I'll say is, look what we've done the last 4 years. Over 10,000 acres with Kiker Preserve and all these the 2 parcels this morning. So it's actually a better program. No matter what you say, that group of people will never change their mind about it. That's the way it is. It's politics, and we understand that. So, but at the end of the day, we did the right thing. The county didn't steal any money. They didn't move any money. What they were doing before was improper as far as dedicating, the $500,000. You probably were at Ken's office, right, at the time that happened. So it worked out, and there was a lot of bad feelings between Charlie and the board and Ken, but it worked out, and everybody did the right thing. So it's a great program now, though.
Yeah. Obviously, I've been not immune to these questions as well, and the conversations we've had was that this was not done solely in a vacuum with the commissioners. There was a team, and Roger and I were debating the acronym, exactly what it meant, but it was a conservation advisory team of some sort that negotiated what those numbers were going to be. They wanted X, we wanted X, we settled on something. So I think that's an important part, that when we came to that number that was going to be, and what we were going to be able to replenish that was an agreed upon number. So I think it was as inclusive as possible. I wasn't here then, but I think it was done the right way.
So, Commissioners, and it bears mentioning that the 33 million, Pete?
43.
$43 million that's in that fund today is for acquisition only, and all of the maintenance and upgrades to the and rehabilitation efforts on these 2020 properties. That's a new line item in the general fund otherwise. So we continue with that investment every year as well.
It's good to point that out. Well, that's a significant amount.
It is, yes, sir.
And it's needed annually, and we have never shirked our responsibility on the maintenance issue, and that's critical to the success of the program.
Yes, sir.
And that's why I came up this morning. When we look at adjoining properties, there's an efficiency, in maintaining those properties because they were adjoining, they're not a piece here and a piece there. We talked about that this morning. So it works.
And commissioners, with this $3 million, you all will have replenished over the last 3 years $15 million in the acquisition fund. So that's proof that we're replenishing the acquisition fund as it needs replenished based on projected spend rates. And then new, right under the 2020 replenishment is revenue stabilization. Talked about $6 million. Essentially what we took was the remaining amount in excess reserves and put it into that. And that can be funds that could help mitigate the revenue losses this year in 1920 or help with 2021. Although I think we might have a better handle on 2021 revenues at this point based on what we're getting from the state and than what this year may end up being. But can be used for either of those in December after closeout. We come back and we say, okay, this is the revenues we ultimately received by September 30th, and this is ultimately the expenses that we or the costs that we expensed through the end of the year. Then we'll know what our true excess reserves was, and then we can give you a better idea of whether we'll have to use that or not.
Commissioners, Pete, before you go on, Commissioner Z, it's probably been 5 years ago that you established the 20% minimum reserve, and that's 20% of the general fund expense. As the tax base continues to grow, that 20% dollar value goes higher and higher. We will probably have reached the point maybe next year, and we'd like to talk with you about it during the 2021 cycle, that 20% is probably too high. There's no, if the money really isn't needed, and it's almost as bad to amass too much money and not have it spent as it is to overspend. If you're not going to spend it, there's no reason to collect it. And so we're not sure what the correct number is just yet, but just wanted to just let you know that we're thinking about that, and we'll be asking to talk with you more about it in the coming year, so that this time next year we'll be in a good position to adjust it properly.
I appreciate you mentioning that, Roger, because when you think about it, it does add up. Here's $92 million that's sitting in reserves that is not going to be used. So that's right. $92 million that's not in the economy helping to create jobs or help people out. But on top of that $92 million, we have, rightfully so, another 40-some million in Conservation 2020 reserves that's not slated to be used for anything, but that is there as a just in case. And then we've got in each of our enterprise funds, right, several million, multiple millions of dollars of reserves that again are there for just in case reasons. And all of those pots of money really do start to add up to quite a bit of money that's just kind of on the sidelines and not being used, and it's taxpayer dollars. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But next year we'll look at, instead of funding the whole 20%, 18.5, something, depending on what the numbers are at that time, so that we might maintain that reserve where it stands rather than let it continue to increase.
That would be one option.
Some of those dollars could be used for capital expenditures, including road projects. Yes, because every year we lose 2 to 3%, sometimes more, to inflation by not building those roads this year. They're going to cost that much more the following year, or 3 years later it's going to be even more.
Yes, sir.
Compounded at 3% a year. So those are the choices I would hope that you would give us an option.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. That option, right this moment, goes probably to the top of the list. Okay, Pete.
Okay, Commissioners, and this just shows a breakout of the general fund as far as board departments and constitutional officers, including the sheriff, as well as other, which is shared costs and state mandates. You've seen this before. These percentages haven't changed much. It just gives you an idea of the distribution of the general fund. That 13% includes your growth increment for infrastructure, your 2020 management, Commissioner Mann, that we were talking about, that's an ongoing general fund obligation now, vehicle replacement, and then things such as Medicaid and juvenile justice, which are state mandates, and major maintenance, which we'll get into later. This is the general fund over the last 8 or 9 years. I've included it just to show you, particularly on things like 2020 management, growth increment for infrastructure, the transit transfer, what's happened there, and when we started to incorporate those costs back into the general fund after the recession. Unincorporated MSTU fund from June 16th, we have no change. We have only one change to it. It's for the analog to digital radios for the departments that reside in that fund, which is primarily DOT and Animal Services, which both those use the emergency radio system quite a bit. And the fund, MSTU fund, is balanced.
Pete, would you back up one slide, please? Commissioners, when you look at this spreadsheet, it looks pretty busy, but I want to point out that your operating departments did a spectacular job this year again. We asked them to really hold the line on spending, and if you take a look at that, under the says BOCC operating departments and the And then the next dark green line below that, all the way to the right, you'll see the operating department's at 131 million versus 142.5 million the previous year. And it just want to point that out that, during this difficult time with the COVID crisis and other things that are going on, the departments really came through, and we appreciate them so much.
Okay, Commissioners, now we'd like to transition to a capital improvement program and major maintenance. And you have the detailed spreadsheets at your disposal, and we've highlighted on those spreadsheets some of the items that we're going to talk about today. Like I said previously, there's not a lot of new on the CIP. These are projects you've seen before, but we'll go over the ones that we expect to construct in the next couple of years. Just overall CIP spending, you can see for 2021 we have 161 million programmed, 638 million over the 5 years. And most of that is in transportation, utilities, public safety, and then natural resources, and we'll go through all those briefly. The original transportation priorities, the 4 main project priorities: Alico Road, Burnt Store Road, Estero Boulevard, and Homestead Road that the board asked us to do several years ago. You can see we're well on the way to either having completed those projects, the most recent being Homestead Road, which we just had the ribbon cutting for, and then Burnt Store Road completed 2 segments, working on the 3rd. Alico Road should be completed by June of next year, and the last segments of Estero Boulevard we expect to start in the next few months.
Excuse me, when is Burnt Store supposed to be done?
Randy? 2021.
2021?
Yep, this coming fiscal year.
I just happened to drive down that the other day, and I noticed that Charlotte County's done a whole lot. I didn't know that was going on at the same time. But we've got quite a way to go to connect there yet. And isn't that too bad that the folks don't appreciate the lights that have been installed?
Did you get your package?
What do we got? Millions? How many millions of dollars in lights have we got up there because we thought we were doing the right thing, and they say, "Wait a minute, I can't sleep."
Only a few don't appreciate it. Everybody else that lives out there enjoys the bright lights for the pedestrians and bicyclists that actually can commute safely now. So.
I know. I'll tell you what. I happen to go to church with a lot of folks who live on that Burnt Store Road and in that neighborhood, and they have complimented us on the lights, and they were pretty upset and nervous about how dangerous that road was before the lights were put up. They thought that it was dark and the speeds were fast, and they did not think that it was a very safe road. And then the lights went up, and I've got nothing but glowing reviews. And certainly,
well, you didn't read the paper. Then.
Well, I certainly understand that you can't make everybody happy all the time,
no.
And
True.
it was a move that we made after a student from Mariner High School was hit by a car, and the officer cited in the report that it was too dark for the driver to see them, and so it was a good move.
With the expansion of the roadway, the lighting's going to become even more important.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of traffic and so on and so forth. So it's
Well, they look very impressive in the daytime. When I was going through there, I didn't.
It's very safe at nighttime.
Yeah.
And one of the things, while I got y'all here, and we were talking about Burnt Store Road, I mean, this is a great road that I think we could finish. I think if we work together, we are 5 members of the Metropolitan Planning Organization vote. And if we work together to try and push Burnt Store Road, that connection between Lee and Charlotte County, up the priority list, I think we can get that evacuation route for Cape Coral completed in a faster schedule. Last time I checked, it looked like it wasn't until 2030 that we were going to touch that unfinished portion. And I want to get that unfinished portion finished quicker than that. So, especially with Charlotte County doing the work on their side. So. Be something we can work on.
Okay, Commissioners, and then there's a couple projects we're about ready to start. Corkscrew Road widening, first phase will start before anything. And then a Three Oaks Parkway extension north, we'll start the canal crossing at the southern end in 2021, and then phase 1 in 21-22 and phase 2 in 22-23. In a future slide, I want to talk about briefly with you all Corkscrew Road, Three Oaks North Extension, and Alico Extension, and kind of how those all interact with each other and what we're looking at as far as construction of those. This just shows you on your top priorities. The construction phases are in blue. Design for the Alico connector is in orange there, and you can see, well, Lehigh Acres paving program, of course, we're doing $5 million a year in perpetuity, basically. And then you can see the construction phases for other priorities in that tier 1 of projects that Commissioner Hammond was just referring to. This is the tier 1, so we've gotten down with funding all the way through 10, and the first, it says the adopted priority, the first 6 or 7, and then you can see we have Alico extension, the Alico connector is the next priority, and in that top tier, then the Hickory Boulevard bridges and Burnt Store Road are the 2 remaining projects in that top tier. So with transportation projects, we are looking at 3 of the projects as well as how we go about their design and construction, and when at some point we will likely have to issue some debt to keep them on track. Corkscrew Road from Ben Hill Griffin to Bellatero, plans are almost complete. We hope to bid by the end of the year and start construction, could be as early as April 2021. We can pay for the first phase with current funding, but we'll have to issue debt for the second phase, which will be in fiscal year 22-23. And right now we're looking at what we're, in relation to that, as well as Alico Road, how much and when we need to issue debt. And so, but we would likely do that fairly shortly, in the next year or 2 at the most. Three Oaks Extension North, as I mentioned before, we will build the canal crossing at the southern end this coming year. We're still working through some right-of-way eminent domain issues for the remaining portion up to Daniels Parkway. So construction for that is programmed in fiscal year 21-22 and 22-23. And then the Alico extension to State Road 82. No decisions have to be made today, but I want to talk to you about the process we're going through with this particular project. The board requested that this project be accelerated as much as possible. And the current PD&E process places construction between 11 and 14 years. That's if the county were to do the PD&E or if the state were to do the PD&E. And so what we're doing right now is we're going through a financial analysis, which would be if we I'm not sure that's a word. If we
Forwent?
Yeah.
I know what you say.
If we
Didn't do?
If we forego,
if we forego the PD&E process,
foregoed, one of the two.
if we were to forego that, we would still need to get environmental permits. We would still need to get a core permit. And without a PD&E, we would not be able to get state funding for this project, which, you know, when we're looking at projects this size, the maximum, I think, is you're looking at maybe $25 million. What we're looking at is if we didn't do a PD&E, just did a design and construction with the appropriate environmental core permits, how much would it reduce that construction time frame? So from 11 to 14 to possibly it could reduce it by 5 years. So maybe into the 7 to 11 year time frame for construction, or 6 to 10, something like that. And how much would that save you as far as time value of money? So how much would that save you? Also, we can look at the cost of congestion in other areas that not having this project, what those costs are, because you're congested in other areas. And so we're going to look at those costs and we're going to compare that to potentially what we could gain by doing a PD&E and see what that offset is, what that balance is, and whether it might make more sense just not to do a PD&E for this project. We're doing that analysis now, and we will come back shortly with a recommendation on that.
Commissioners, I appreciate, Pete, you guys doing that analysis for us. This is a road connection that at the Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Committee meeting, Don Scott said the models that are going into the long-range transportation plan show this is one of the biggest bangs for our buck as far as relieving Daniels and Colonial, which are two very congested roadways. I think even Brandy Searchy and our team, I see him nodding his head, have talked about just the impact that this road would make. And so it is a priority, and I think the board rightfully so has requested that this project be accelerated as much as possible. It's on our lobby logs who we talk to about what. I had a company come and talk to me about a design build finance idea. Basically, they didn't have a specific proposal related to this road, but would be interested in researching it for us. There's an idea that the contractor would design and build the road, and then they design and build it today and then allow us to pay them in the 6 through 10 budget years. So if we've got money budgeted for it in the 6 through 10 capital improvement budget, but we want the road today, they would build it today and then finance it for us, and we'd pay them later when we have the money available. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't seen the detailed numbers or proposal, but I think there are some things we need to look into as far as a design build and design build finance that might get us a road quicker, especially when we're looking at potentially 11 to 14 years for this one.
Also, when you look at the amount of business committed and planning on that corridor there, I mean, it's in conjunction with the airport and just along Alico Road, that's our hub, in Mid-Lee, and the ability to move people, labor, because when companies come in, one of the first questions is, where's my labor force, and where do they live, what's the cost of living, and so on and so forth. And if we can show them, and we've been doing some work on the Horizon Council, where those pockets of activity are. So if you got people driving from Lehigh, through the connector and down to that point, as instead of going somewhere else and stuff, it saves them time, takes the burden of travel and cost. To me, that's probably the most important strip that we have, right now, from an economic perspective.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of like, I think you're talking about kind of like the Swifty project that was done back in, I don't know who from staff was here then, back in 2006 and 7, the state did the I-75 expansion from south to north Fort Myers. The state came in and the Swifty project, they built it, and then the state turned around and paid for it after a couple of years. It was done like over a year. It was really quick. I don't know if Randy, you remember that project, Randy? Yeah, and it was a private partnership where they came in and built it, and then the state reimbursed them. They had a small percent, like 2%, 3%. But yeah, it's some options that we could do for big projects like this, like over $100 million. But that was done back in 06 and 08. Commissioner Mann, you probably remember that when they widened, Charlie Crist was governor then. Yeah, and they came in and it's like overnight, it was just like bang. They added extra lanes on I-75, put that barrier up. A couple of times actually. I put the barrier up, I think they took it down and put it back up again. But it was a quick project though.
Could you all bring us some options like that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're happy to take a look at it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Let me just give you I don't know whether it's a downside, but on the formula for funding and front funding, and the contractors come in here in all their generosity to fund our projects for us. In 06, right after I got here, I got a phone call from a friend. I don't know that I wrote it down at the time because I didn't think of it as a lobbyist contact, but I'd known this person in Tallahassee for a number of years, and they said, he said, Frank, we would sure like to get in on the deal, and he described exactly the mechanism that you just described about them going to spend all the money, and we can build that overpass at Colonial and Fowler for you, because y'all are going to do that. And I said, wait a minute, I just got here, but I'm not sure about all these projects, but I haven't seen that one. And I got to checking around, and it wasn't approved yet. And of course, we ultimately closed that concept down of even building that. But sometimes my caveat here is look out, because some of these guys with their gift horses coming in, it's not bad to open that mouth and take a look in there and see who's pushing it. Whether the project's legit. Yours, in this case, are clear, and we've seen them and know what we're talking about. But some of these folks that are going to do us big favors, they're not doing it because they love us. Yeah.
I hear you. All right, very good.
Dave?
Mr. Chair, we do, the company you spoke about, we do have a meeting coming up with them, so we'll be able to bring some options back to you.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioners, as public safety projects, we've got a couple, one that is close to coming to fruition and the other that is in the late planning stages. As we've talked before with buying the radios, the emergency radio upgrade, we have all that equipment. We have a plan to deploy that over the next year, and that whole $15 million project should be completed by the fourth quarter of 2021. So you'll have the project done, and then you'll have all the radios in hand. And then the EOC expansion, it's a $16.3 million project, 37,000 square foot expansion to the existing Emergency Operations Center, which we've all become very familiar with. And both of those projects you have funded in previous years, so those are both fully funded. Parks and Recreation coming up in the next year. Boca Grande Dog Park, paid with community park impact fees, and that is going to be located on half of the old Boca ball fields, and it'll include areas for both off-leash large and small dogs. Larry Kiker Preserve, we have $500,000 programmed for 2021 with amounts in the following years for implementation. This will be paid through Conservation 2020 Management, which will be paid by the general fund, essentially. And it's the beginning of the planning for both the restoration, which is a partnership with the Natural Resources, and recreational amenities for that preserve. And then Lehigh Acres Community Park expansion. We've programmed money in previous years, another $1.8 million this coming year. It's all from regional park impact fees. That's going to be a nice project. It's going to be 3 new lighted football soccer fields, a locker room consistent restroom building similar to the one at North Fort Myers Community Park, 100 additional parking spaces, walking path and pavilions, disc golf, and also co-location there of a Lehigh Acres transit transfer station. 6 Mile Cypress Slough improvements, additional parking. It's constrained with parking right now, and ADA upgrades in fiscal year 21-22, and then the Abel Canal Greenway in fiscal year 23-24. This is a project that you've seen on the CIP for quite some time, and it's going to be constructed this coming year. This is the southern portion near Alico Road of our Wild Turkey Strand Preserve, Conservation 2020 Preserve, and the southern end there you can see is going to be restored for mitigation credits and is being funded by Department of Transportation and Utilities for their projects. It's a $5 million project. It'll include exotics removal, restoration of flowways and wildlife habitat, also be a source of some TMDLs for the county. Natural resources funding that we have in hand is Clusachy TMDL, so that's the basin. Those are the projects we do to reduce nutrient loading. We have $6.5 million sitting in that account to be used for projects. Flood remediation, the board approved this a couple of years ago, $2.7 million. We're going to use that this coming year as cash flow for the next item, which is the East Mulock Water Control District infrastructure repairs, which we received a CDBG disaster relief grant earlier this year in January of $7.1 million. So you can see the upper two pictures there are the area where we're going to restore flowways, do sidewalks, do infrastructure projects. And that's a $7.1 million grant from the federal government. And we have to pay for those. We pay as we go, and then we put in those costs for reimbursement quarterly. So we're going to use that $2.7 million to pay for the costs until we get reimbursed the next quarter. Recently completed in the lower left-hand corners, this is a big project, an all-grade stormwater park finally has come to fruition. That's a water quality project. And then soon to be constructed, of course, you've got the San Carlos Park area drainage and infrastructure improvements I talked about. But also you see in the middle slide there, Canal L3, that's a canal that runs south of Boy Scout Road along the Sam Galloway Ford property there. That is a water quality project. And then we received hazard mitigation grants for 2 flood mitigation projects, which one is in the Iona Development District area, and another Canal H7. If you want more information about those projects, Roland can speak to those. Transit, I discussed earlier the South Area Transfer Station, which we will be doing at the Election Center. Rosa Parks downtown Fort Myers improvements, that's been on the plan for quite some time, and that will include some improvements, but also 4 new bus bays. And then, as I discussed, the Lehigh Acres Park and Ride, which will be co-located at the Lehigh Acres Community Park. So that'll be a nice facility. And the board's already funded upgrades for 40 bus shelters to make them ADA compliant, 102 landing pads with benches throughout the transit system, and we are constructing those as we go. Solid waste, the big project coming up over the next few years is the Lee landfill redesign, which is, while it's an expansion, it's an expansion of the existing permitted footprint. It will add another 14 years of airspace to the landfill, so that should take the current airspace capacity to the year 2040. And then utilities, coming up, we have a plan to expand the Three Oaks wastewater treatment facility from 6 million gallons per day to 8 million gallons per day to provide for growth in that area, and also for any potential septic conversion from some of the studies we've been doing. As we did in this past year, we removed the operations building from the CIP, Utilities Operations Building, and we're reevaluating those space needs. And then also $750,000 Utilities is funding a wastewater master plan, which is going to be a coordinated effort between Natural Resources and Lee County Utilities to evaluate priorities and methods for septic conversion for improved water quality within impaired bodies. And then really quickly, we're toward the end here. Major maintenance items, those are, flooring, painting, roofing, chillers, HVAC, all that major maintenance each year, which is done to maintain the useful life of a capital item or in a facility. And those are paid with out of the respective funds that those projects are being done. There's a certain portion that's in the general fund, which applies to not only facilities pertaining to general fund departments, but a large part of this goes to maintaining the facilities that are occupied by the constitutional officers, both the downtown jail, the Ortez jail, the Justice Center complex. So you can see that runs about $13 million a year in the general fund. I do want to say we have completed an extraordinary amount of major maintenance projects over the last few years. And just wanted to take a look back just to see so you can see how much has been done. Reskinning of the sprung units at the Ortez jail facility, the Sheriff's Real-Time Crime Center at his headquarters on 6 Mile Cypress, on Gladiola 6 Mile Cypress. Sheriff's South District Station, relocation of Public Safety Administration out of the Sheriff's headquarters and now is downtown here in Fort Myers. Moved court mediation from this building to back behind security at the Justice Center. Hertz Arena roof and hurricane hardening. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner. Huge project to keep that as one of our major shelters during a hurricane. Administration building first and fourth floor renovations, including security measures, as well as you can see in the lower right, as well as modifications for more touchless interactions. You can see the screens there at the front desk, and then County City Annex second floor renovations. Underway or soon to start, the Melvin Morgan Constitutional Complex restrooms and plumbing upgrades, medical examiner improvements, and the Downtown Justice Center roof replacement, which is a nearly $3 million project. And then in the future, Downtown Justice Center proper, the old building from 1980, the plumbing replacement, that's a $4 million project. That plumbing is 40 years old. Ortiz jail roof and chiller replacement, and then numerous HVAC replacements throughout the county. So there's a significant amount of major maintenance we're doing having to do with roofs, plumbing, chillers, HVAC.
Just a good job to the team on that. That's a ton of work. When you look at it, that is a ton of work, and it's all done really well. You look at the lobby of the administration building is fantastic. So
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's, keeping up with these major maintenance projects, saves money in the long term. If we end up with a lot of deferred maintenance, that'll break a budget in a heartbeat.
Could I ask Pete to go back 5 or 6 pages to where you were on solid waste and utilities? We kind of shot past one that I wasn't familiar with. Under the utilities, the bottom, last one, wastewater master plan. Evaluate priorities and methods for septic conversion for improved water quality within impaired water bodies. Now, I know we've been talking about the one in North Fort Myers, and we're into additional study on that right now. Mm-hmm. But what is this referring to? And when I adopt this as part of the budget that's coming up, what did I just agree to?
Roland, can you help us out?
What further study are we doing on septic conversion? I mean, there's a huge cost involved in just saying those words, so I just need to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, as you know, back, I guess, in 2019, the governor issued an executive order to update our basin management action plan for the Caloosahatchee River. And part of that basin management action plan was a directive to local governments, Lee County in particular for the Caloosahatchee, to create a wastewater master plan to show over the next 20 years what septic to sewer conversions or alternatives that can be made over the next 20 years to get some order of idea of when those septic systems could possibly be taken offline. Again, they're trying to go after sources of nutrients into our waterways, and they focused on wastewater as well as septic, agriculture, as well as wastewater discharge.
What have we done so far, Roland? What are we looking at as potential areas to improve?
Yeah, we basically just now wrapping up the North Fort Myers study, the second year round of data collection, and that pretty much reaffirms that we have a septic tank influence those surrounding waters in that area. So I think we're going to come back to you, I believe, in January to go over some alternatives and possibly.
So we're not there yet, but this is contemplated within the budget. Some study money or something is going to be.
Commissioner, you funded, the first study was funded through the EP, North Fort Myers was funded.
The little guy came
You
here
funded the Lee County.
And we told him to go ahead and do it again.
Yes, correct. You funded the Lee County study. We have a number of phases coming forward that all come together. So in October, we'll be coming to you about the Basin Management Action Plan that Roland just mentioned. That gives you more updates on the information that we're talking about regarding septic tanks. Then we're going to come back to you again with the flood mitigation study, then followed up by the North Fort Myers study and then the Lee County study. So we have a number of work sessions to do with you that encompass all this information, and you can see on this slide.
All related to the Caloosahatchee?
Yes, but we're endeavored into a county-wide bacteria assessment as well. We've already started on that. We've got 2 sampling events, and I think they're sampling this week as well. We're coming back to you in fall of 2021 to give you the results of that. That's areas where there's impaired waters throughout the county that also have septic tank influence, and they're within a quarter mile of a water body that is impaired. And so we've concentrated our efforts in testing those sites as well to affirm if indeed septic is the issue in those watersheds, or it might be something else. It could be animal, it could be something else that's causing the impairments.
So, Commissioners, all of this leads us to the end game, which is septic to sewer conversions or other technology recommendations that we'll start talking with you about in January, right, Dave?
Right.
And you're right. It will be a hugely expensive
It's a horrible
endeavor.
cost, upwards no less than probably $25,000 per resident to make these conversions. It's awful. And I'm not saying that to keep us from looking at it. We may have to, but I think I need to know more as we move forward in the study here as this evolves, before we start weighing options. I certainly wouldn't want to slow down on the areas already identified as dangerous and needs more attention. But as we continue on this, everybody's in favor of protecting the Caloosahatchee. There's not a soul, and boy, do I hear the speeches on the campaign stump right now about how everybody's in favor of clean water. I can't find anybody against it. Can you imagine that? And there's no limit to the money we're going to spend on doing it. Anyhow, they're just,
Yeah, so, Commissioner, this
from time to time, just come whisper in our ears.
and we will. But part of this whole effort is to identify those areas where conversions to central sewer or a different technology is warranted. We've got about 100,000 septic tanks in Lee County, but not all 100,000 need to be replaced. Some of them are in locations that are perfectly suited to people using a septic tank. So, once we understand all of that, then we'll be able to talk with you about where the areas are and start talking about potential solutions.
Am, is that you in the back with a mask? Would you come see me afterwards, because Lehigh Acres has been brought to my attention that the FGUA out there has some projects they're contemplating, and that's a totally independent utility that we don't control or pay for, but when they do things and it costs money, we're the ones that are going to get the complaints from the residents out there. So I just need to be brought up to date with whatever's going on there. Thank you, Roger. So you know where my concern is.
And Commissioners, that discussion leads into your other board priorities that we work on, along with COVID and the budget. As Roland said, the Basin Management Action Plan, we plan to do a workshop on that in October. That relates to our TMDL requirements and any changes that may be had from that. Flood mitigation in November based on the studies we've been doing. North Fort Myers pollution source testing in January after the second year of results. Septic alternatives in January, and as well as countywide pollution source testing results in fall of 2021. Those dates are tentative, subject to change, but that's kind of the schedule. Colonial Alternative Study, which we've had for a while and have been wanting to get to the board, as well as the Alico extension recommendation that I discussed earlier. We will bring that back sooner rather than later, so we just don't have an exact date on that. And then long-term solid waste discussion with you sometime over the next year. So those are the other board priorities that we plan to bring to you in workshops over the next year. And with that, we're ready to come back August 25th with any additional input you may have now.
Commissioners, this being the second draft, if there are adjustments you would like for us to make or other considerations that you'd like to convey to us now, we're happy to take that information, and then we'll make whatever adjustments are necessary. Otherwise, this would be the budget that we intend to present to you in
September.
That's it, September.
Can you give me a sort of a thumbnail sketch as to where the conversations with the folks looking after the homeless, the people that were here and are going to volunteer to come up and study and make more recommendations? Because we haven't really said much about social services today.
Mark Moore? Mark's been working.
I just don't want those folks forgotten in this process. So
Mark?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Yeah, we've been working continuously on addressing the issues. I had the opportunity to meet with Commissioner Sendelli and some advocates. I've been meeting personally with some advocates as well. Mr. Harner and I met with the Salvation Army just recently, and we've been engaging the Homeless Coalition, exploring what opportunities we have to find the gaps in the services that we're providing the homeless and find some really applicable solutions that are relevant to the monies that we have and the programs we currently have stood up. So to that end, we have a few things that we're working on right now, currently. We've engaged with local law enforcement as well as the city of Fort Myers on the concept of bringing HOT teams, and that's a homeless outreach team, here to Lee County to work countywide when encountering the homeless. And the idea is that we provide them wraparound services. Right now, it's common for law enforcement to push the homeless off the property. And where do they go? We don't know. So one of the things that Commissioner Sendelli and I heard is we need to be able to send them somewhere where they can get at least their basic needs met and get them into the systems that we've developed. The coordinated entry program is pretty much the way that we funnel the homeless into the services that we provide. So to that end, the HOT teams is now as a concept that we're trying to get some buy-in from law enforcement, as well as some local mental health counseling services. Center Care is one that has a really deep interest in joining us. So the idea is us to engage with them, do some triage there on site, find out what services they need, and direct them directly to those services. And those services could be mental health, they could be triage, it could be rapid rehousing, it could be a multitude of services that are available in the community that are supported by either the county or our nonprofit providers. So that's one concept we're working on. We also heard that these basic needs are not being met, and we discovered that all of the things that are being offered in our community don't seem to be well coordinated. We have feedings going on all across the community. We have services such as Salvation Army and Community Cooperative doing things in the community to help the homeless. However, there seems to be a lack of coordination. And what we've heard from the advocates is they'd like a centralized way to provide these services to the homeless. So we started to explore, well, what structures do we have currently stood up in the county? And there are partners that we have that we currently engage with that have the foundation for these types of services. And we describe them as day sheltering. And those are basically locations that are centralized with multiple partners working out of one location with the wraparound services that we're hearing from the community that are not being met. Food, clothing, showering, laundering. But there's more to that. There's also the counseling part of it that's missing. And as well as the services we provide. How do we get people into the programs that we have, not just into them, but to service them more rapidly? So those are all of the inputs that we've taken from the community, from advocates. I know you had asked them to share, and they call us. We've met with them. We're listening. We've identified the gaps. We found areas and ways that we can improve our own internal services through Human Veteran Services. We've reallocated some resources. We've actually reorganized Human Veteran Services to improve what they're delivering to the community. So we'll continue to listen. You heard today about the rapid rehousing that you all approved, accepting the funds from HUD. That's a piece of the solution, getting people into housing quicker so they're not on the streets, so they don't become one of those numbers of homeless folks. So it basically is a community effort. We're trying to engage all the partners that we know that have the wherewithal and the resources to help us. It's a continual thing that we're working on. So I hope as we move down this path with all of these multiple solutions that we can brief you and bring you up to speed on what we're doing.
I'm very pleased with that answer. I truly am. You've done everything that I would have hoped from several months ago when we first had the pack of folks coming into the chambers to communicate with us. I still don't have an answer, maybe you're not prepared to give us one, as to how what you have been studying on relates to our budget this time. Are we about to miss an opportunity to consider funding some of what you've been talking about, or is that easing into the process while as we speak? I don't want us to, come September, adopt a budget and say, boy, we got these other things that.
That's
I'm very pleased at your answer, though. There's a communication, I think, that has never existed that you just described between the advocates and the recipients.
We started that first meeting with those people that we see every so often. And the first meeting we had was just to listen. What is their perspective on life in the streets and homelessness and so on?
There was a lot of people complaining, but I didn't know what they were complaining about.
We just sat in the conference room and listened for a while. And then, instead of trying to come up with a solution, and credit to Mark and everything, then it was, okay, let's look internally. And the services that we have, are they answering those questions, in the right way, with the right utilities and so on and so forth? And that went from there. And I think the solutions that we've talked about so far, it's not a grandiose plan. It's what are the immediate needs? Where can I go to clean up? Where can I go to, for sanitary issues and stuff? And so we're looking at alternatives for those that are cost effective, but I had the same question: is in this budget, are we putting the numbers, that we can initiate at least those first steps?
Yeah, the great opportunity we have here is the CARES Act funds that we have. We've really programmed those to meet some of those short-term needs. The ESG, the CDBG funds that we're getting from HUD have been really helpful in that planning. We also have the PFR process as well, where we're allocating monies to community partners who have always been there for these type of programs. So yeah, we're very fortunate to have the CARES Act funding. They'll help us bridge some of the gaps, but certainly as we look into the future for more longer-term solutions, we'll have to consider what impact that might have on operational budgets.
Well, and as program opportunities present themselves for the utilization of the CARE dollars, we can deal with that after the budget, because those dollars are sitting in the bank waiting for us to distribute. So to the extent we can utilize those dollars, wonderful, they're there. I just didn't want to miss opportunities as we're bringing this one in for a landing to do those things that maybe you've been able to identify already and put a price tag by. So we'll be thinking about that and clarifying that when we get together for our next. Thank you. Good, Mark. I'm pleased.
Thank you. Well, I'm okay with where we are, and I can't think of, we have touched on a huge range of topics today, and I'm glad with what you brought up, too. I think that, I agree, was a great answer. And beyond the wide range of topics we've discussed today, can't think of anything more to add.
As Commissioners, we've tried to make sure that we stay on track with your original policy objectives. And one of the, I think maybe third to the last slide, that we wanted to demonstrate that, with everything that's going on, we haven't forgot about all those other very large efforts. So, I couldn't be more proud of the organization and the work that everyone's done to make sure that we keep up with, regular service delivery, capital projects, and all the other work that's come along in the meantime. So, and thank you to the board. For the way you conduct business. If it weren't for you all, we couldn't possibly accomplish this much work every year.
Excellent. Commissioner Sandelli?
I just had two quick things, and this is, last year I just kind of got thrown in the deep end with this. This is the first time through this whole process. And two issues. One is, I guess hurricanes are top of mind because we've had a storm out there, so on and so forth. And I don't know at this point how to assess what our needs are going to be long term as we grow as a community, as storms may be more prevalent, hardening, whether it's schools or other. So I don't know I assume that's built in here somewhere, but we enjoy good times. When the bad times comes, where do I go? And we have and then the other thing is a small project, but like the library, the old library in Benita. We've had a number of discussions on where that might go and how it might be used, and there's a number of different varieties. But it might be a situation where we have some kind of sharing, with the city and getting it to a certain point to turn it over, how it's going to be used. And those types of cooperative efforts, you know, where's that money come from? And is there some contingencies in there? And that's just one example, maybe others. So that's my only adds.
I just a quick word on hurricanes and future planning. That's something that we understand very well and we're pretty good at. So we'll at some point along the way here, we'll share all of that with you, because you're right, as population grows, we'll require more shelter space, but based on existing building codes, fewer people should need to shelter in the future unless they're in a flood zone. So it's, there's kind of an art form to all that planning, but we understand it well, so we'll be sharing that with you. And you brought up the old Bonita Springs Library building, and you know what? That was completely off my radar. I think well, with everything going on, that's just, oh yeah, we still own that building down there.
I think there's heat practice about that from the time.
Yeah.
There's ways to monetize it, there's ways to sell
Right.
it, there's ways to use it for different facilities.
And Roger, we are currently, or we will be having community testing at that library, and we've met with community folks recently, which we touched base on about future use for that facility as well.
So Dave's on top of it.
Brady's on top of it. Brady's on top. She's trying to hide over there.
Good stuff. Anything, Commissioner?
No, it's a great budget. I look forward to, it's going to be a great year, and I look forward to getting back to normal, and look forward to working all these projects coming through for next year. Yes, sir.
Can I just tell you guys how cool it was to spend 90 minutes talking about something other than the pandemic and like county business? That's been a welcome.
Business still goes on every day.
Yes, it does. Thank you for the good work.
You want to bring up while we're still here?
No, I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. All right. Thank you, guys. That was a great meeting. If there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, everybody.